welcome back to the channel. If you're new, I'm Rini and I make DIY decor and craft videos. With holidays around the corner, today's video is all about crafting your own Christmas cards. Before we get started, please consider subscribing if you haven't already and click the bell icon to get notified every single time I post a new video. So let's get started. To make the cards, I used this 8.3 by 11.5 inches craft paper pad. I tore a brown cardstock off the paper pad. Then I folded it in half, ensuring the corners aligned. I drew a vertical line down the center of the paper, using it as a guide to sketch the outline of a Christmas tree. Then I marked intervals of 1 cm along the entire outline. Using a needle, I poked holes following the markings. I erased the pencil markings and threaded a needle with green embroidery floss. After approximating the amount of embroidery floss required, I cut the floss and secured it by tying a few knots at the end. I started from the back of the card, pulling the thread through the topmost hole. Then I sent the needle through the intersection point between the tree and its trunk and pulled the thread. I brought the needle up through the adjacent hole, again sent it back into the starting point and pulled the thread. This way I continued bringing the needle up through one point and sending it into another. I didn't have any particular stitching pattern in mind, I simply moved from point to point, continuing to fill in the shape. I used the same green embroidery floss for the trunk of the tree. You can use brown thread if you want. After I was done, I tied off the thread securely at the back of the card and trimmed the excess. Using a gold Sharpie, I drew a star at the top of the tree. It was time to add some embellishments to the tree. First, I threaded a needle with gold-colored thread. Feel free to use any thread you like. Then I grabbed my stash of beads. I brought the needle up from the back of the card to the front through topmost point on the left of the tree. First, I strung one gold bead onto the thread. Then I pushed the needle diagonally into the hole on the right side. I brought the needle up from the next hole at the left and strung 2 beads. Again, I pushed the needle into the hole on the right side, making the line parallel to the previous one. In the same way, I continued the pattern from left to right, creating parallel diagonal lines, and I also kept on increasing the number of beads as the thread length increased on each step. We want to ensure the beads are evenly spaced for a balanced appearance. Once I added all the beads, I secured the thread on the back of the card with a couple of knots. Then I went ahead and trimmed the excess thread. Leaving a little gap from the bottom of the card, I drew a straight line with a pencil. Using the line as a guide, I wrote "Merry Christmas" with a black pen. In order to mimic calligraphy effect, I thickened the downstrokes of each alphabet by drawing a parallel line next to each downstroke. Then I went ahead and filled in the gaps. Using a ruler and gold Sharpie, I created a border along the edges of the card. So this is how our DIY Christmas card turned out. To make our next card, I used one of these black cardstocks. After that, I folded the paper in half. Then I grabbed a round cookie cutter with a 5 cm diameter and these 3 pastel acrylic paints. I dipped a brush into this lilac paint and used it to apply an even layer of paint onto the interior edge of the cookie cutter. Then I positioned it onto the card where I wanted the circle and pressed it down. I applied equal pressure all the way around to transfer the paint onto the card. Then I carefully lifted the cookie cutter to reveal the painted circle. I wanted the circle to be a little more thick, so I repeated the same process once again. Then I wiped off the previous paint from the cookie cutter and applied lavender paint all around its edges. I positioned the painted side of the cookie cutter a little below the previous circle and pressed it down evenly. I lifted it straight up and went for another layer. We want to apply an even layer of paint and align it correctly to match the edges of the first layer. To paint the last circle, I used this peach acrylic paint and repeated the same process. I I wanted the ornaments to appear as though they were hanging from a gold thread. To achieve this, I used gold Sharpie to draw vertical lines. I also wanted to add a bow on the top of each ornament. Taking a dry brush, I dipped the tip into a small amount of white acrylic paint. Using dry brush technique, I painted the bows to create broken textured lines. It's important not to apply too much pressure while painting and to wipe off any excess paint. I wrote Happy Holidays on the bottom right corner of the card using gold Sharpie. Then I did faux calligraphy by thickening the downstrokes of the letters. Next, I grabbed some gold acrylic paint, poured a little amount and added a few drops of water to it. I mixed it well with a brush and then placed another brush under it and tapped it gently to flick the paint onto the paper. This completed our DIY Christmas ornament card. I think it turned out better than I envisioned. To make the last card, I used a piece of brown cardstock. Next, I placed this bowl on the card and traced it. Before tracing it, I made sure there was an equal amount of space on both the left and right sides of the card. I also left a larger gap toward the bottom for writing and drawing the base of the snow globe. Then I cut along the outline of the circle shape using a pair of scissors. Then using a pencil, I lightly sketched the base of the snow globe. For creating layers inside the snow globe, I used a piece of watercolor paper. I traced the bottom half of the circle again and started to draw a layer of snow, some pine trees, and a tiny penguin wearing a woolen scarf. I also left about a 1/4-inch border along the bottom edge of the semicircle to make it easier to glue onto the card. Using a pair of scissors, I carefully cut out the layer following the outline. This was going to be the front layer and I was going to create 3 layers in total. To make the next layer, I traced the shape of the snow globe again and placed the first layer on it to determine the placement of the middle layer. I drew another layer of snow and some little pine trees. Using a waterproof gel pen, I made the lines darker. Then I drew the border at the bottom and cut out the layer. To make the last layer, which was the background layer, I traced the circular shape of snow globe on the watercolor paper. I lightly sketched a bigger circle around it to create a border. Then I cut the circle out. It was time to paint all the layers we created. To paint the snow on the first layer, I mixed white with a tiny amount of light brown watercolor. I painted the penguin's body with white watercolor. To add shadows under the penguin and the trees, I mixed black and brown watercolor. I wanted to create a light shadow, so I added some extra water to the paint. To paint the pine trees, I mixed green and black watercolor. Then I painted the penguin's scarf red. I used orange watercolor to paint its feet. To paint the rest of the penguin's body, I used black watercolor. Using white watercolor, I added several layers of snow to the trees. To add more detailing to the penguin's scarf, I painted stripes on it with dark brown paint. To paint the snow on the middle layer, I made this grayish-brown paint by combining black, brown, and white watercolor. To paint the trees on this layer, I mixed green and black paint but diluted it a bit more than the first layer. Since the trees were at a distance, they were supposed to look faded. After the paint dried, I added snow layers to the trees. For the background layer, I dampened the paper evenly with water. Then I mixed blue and black watercolor to paint the sky. I was painting cloud-like shapes with my brush and blending any harsh edges while the paint was still drying. This way I achieved a cloudy sky effect. After the first layer dried, I applied another layer of bluish-black watercolor to add more depth and darken the sky. Next, I painted the base of the snow globe with black watercolor. Once the paint was dry, I added shadows on both the sides. Then I used a black gel pen to outline the edges of the base. I used a pencil to lightly sketch a circle around the outer edge of the snow globe. Then I went back with a black Sharpie and drew short, evenly spaced dashes along that line. Next, I added tiny stars to the sky with silver Sharpie. It was time to assemble all the layers. After determining the position of the front layer, I did pencil markings at the back of the card as a guide. Then I applied glue along the border and attached the cutout to the back of the card while aligning it to the pencil marking. After that, I adjusted the position of the middle layer and marked it. I grabbed double-sided tape and cut a small piece. Then I stuck the tape to the back of the first layer to create a separation between the layers while adding depth and dimension. Next, I went ahead and pasted the middle layer. Finally, I grabbed the last layer and repeated the same process. Using a silver Sharpie, I wrote "Merry Christmas" on the card. To add more detail, I drew star shapes around the snow globe. This wraps up our DIY snow globe Christmas card. I hope you liked these DIY Christmas cards. If you recreate any of these, I would love to see them, so you can tag me on Instagram at DustyUse. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a wonderful holiday season.